Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's International Parent Family Orientation session. We will get started in just a moment as we allow for folks to make their way into tonight's session. Just as a reminder, during any point during tonight's session, please feel free to use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions you may have. We have staff on the back end that will work to answer questions offline, but we will also have a Q&A at the end of tonight's session. Again, to propose any questions you may have, please utilize the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. All right, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to you all. Thank you again for joining us for this International Parent Family Orientation session entitled Your Student's Visa Status, What You Need to Know. My name is Dan Perez. I am the Assistant Director for the Office of Parent and Family Programs, and I have the pleasure of being tonight's host for this session, which will be working with our partners over at the International Students Programs Office, specifically their wonderful staff member, Pauline De Guzman, who will be covering tonight's information. While we have folks in the room, I'm going to ask who we have, so please feel free to raise your hand if this statement applies to you. So first, I'd like to know where you all are joining us from. So if you could, please raise your hand if you are joining us from the United States this evening. All right. Almost about 15 folks joining us from the U.S. Great. Thank you so much. Feel free to lower those hands. All right. And if you are joining us from North America, so not the United States, so if you're joining us from Canada or Mexico, please raise your hand. Cool. Almost a handful. That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are joining us from Europe, please raise your hand. If we have anyone staying up late to join us from Europe. Oh, fantastic. I knew we'd have at least a couple. All right, if you are joining us from Asia, please raise your hand. Oh, fantastic. Let's see, can we hit 20? Almost hit 20. Okay, please lower those hands. All right, if you are joining us from Africa, please raise your hand. Do we have any folks from Africa this evening? All right. If you are joining us from South America or Central America, please raise your hand. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's get to know a little bit about your student. If your student is attending school in the United States for the first time, please raise your hand. Oh, wow. Over 30 students attending school in the United States for the first time. All right, lower those hands. All right, raise your hand if your student has attended high school in the United States. All right. A handful, awesome. And could you please raise your hand if your student is a transfer student, where they're coming from another university? we have one transfer student represented tonight. Awesome. All right, and the last polling question I have for you all tonight is please raise your hand if you plan on attending the in-person program being held on campus this Sunday, September 18th. Okay, almost half. Well, we look forward to meeting you on Sunday. Thank you so much for playing along and allowing us to get to know who we have the pleasure of presenting in front of tonight. And speaking of presentation, it is my pleasure to introduce Pauline De Guzman, who will be joining us from the International Students and Programs Office to discuss tonight's session, visa status, what you need to know.
All right. Thank you, Dan, for that great introduction. Hello to all of our international parents and families. On behalf of the International Students and Programs Office, also known as ISPO, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. As Dan mentioned, my name is Pauline De Guzman. I am the Assistant Director of Student Services here at ISPO. And we will be working really closely with your students, so I look forward to getting to know so many of them. Today's agenda is listed here on the screen, and today we'll be talking about your student support system at ISPO and on campus. We'll also review your students' visa documents, discuss their F1 or J1 regulations, and also review some resources for travel that your student can rely on if they ever encounter any issues when entering the US or traveling domestically or internationally. Now, your student should have attended last week's Know the Rules orientation session with ISPO. And if they haven't, please do encourage them to view the recording available on ISPO's website. That session covered very similar information to this one. So please do encourage them to rewatch that from whenever they would like. Although your student is responsible for their own status, it's always a great idea that you as parents and families will also understand their visa documents and rules and their visa status. Now, ISPO is here for your student and also for you parents and families. As your student prepares to start their program of study here at UC San Diego, ISPO can help with any questions they might have regarding their visa status, travel, work in the US, and so forth. UC San Diego is a very large campus, and it can be confusing from time to time to know who they should go for what questions. But please know they can always start with ISPO, and we will always point them in the right direction. Now, your students' immigration documents are extremely important. They not only show that the student in the US is in valid status, but they'll also use these documents to open up bank accounts, apply for driver's licenses, or work authorization and other benefits. So it's truly important that they understand how to keep these up to date. The documents we'll be discussing today are a student's passport, their F1 or J1 visa, their F1 Form I-20 or J1 Form DS 2019, their arrival or departure record, also known as their Form I-94, and also some address reporting requirements. So let's jump into our student documents now. Okay, so first let's go ahead and review your student's passport. Now the passport is issued by your student's country of citizenship. Each one will look different, but your student should ensure that the biographical information is correct. ISPO will use the biographical information on your student's passport to ensure it matches what we issue on the student's Form I-20 or Form DS 2019. They should also note the expiration date. Usually that's in the bottom right-hand corner, but a student's passport must always be valid for at least 6 months into the future from the date they enter the US. The renewal process can take some time. It varies, so a student should start the renewal process early. Now, luckily, your passport or your student's passport can be renewed inside or outside of the US at your country's embassy or consulate. The next document is your student's US visa. Now, this page is located inside of your student's passport. The visa is like a key, and like a key, you must have it valid in order to enter the US. However, once you're inside of the US, if the key or the visa expires, that's okay. As long as the student is following the rules of their F1 or J1 status, they can remain in the US with a valid, they can remain in the US even with an expired visa. Okay. Now, to note, if the visa expires, it can only be renewed outside of the US at a US embassy or consulate abroad. So it's important to plan travel with your student if their visa expires, and to note that the next time your student travels outside of the US, they must renew the visa in order to request entry back to the US to resume their F1 or their J1 program. Now, F1 and J1 students are also obligated to keep their Form I-20 and Form DS-2019 up to date. Students should submit any changes to the I-20 or DS-2019 to ISPO within 10 days of any change. Changes may include an extension to their program end date, perhaps program level, their major, any biographical information, or any changes to enrollment. Students can request these changes by logging into ISPO's iPortal document request system. I'm sure many of your students have already logged into ISPO's iPortal to request their initial I-20 or DS-2019s in order to travel and start their programs here with us in the fall. So they should be familiar with our iPortal. Now, the next document is your student's arrival or departure record, also known as your electronic Form I-94. The electronic Form I-94 can only be generated and printed out by your student once they've arrived to the US. So we talk about this document quite a bit because it does show that you are in the US in valid F1 or J1 status. And for those of you who still have students who have not yet arrived to the US, they won't have one yet. But upon arrival, usually about 24 to 48 hours, they're able to generate one for themselves reflecting their admission to the US. Now, the Form I-94 shows how the port of entry admitted your student. It will reflect the class of admission or visa that was used to admit them. It will also inform them how long they're admitted and how long they can stay in the US. This is known as the admit until date. Students need to check this document after admission to make sure that there isn't a date listed after the admit until date field. What they should see instead is text that says D/S, which stands for duration of status. Now, if your student does see a specific date or any other value aside from D/S, or perhaps an error with their name, an error with their class of admission, or any other information, please do have them come and speak with ISPO. We can give them information on how to resolve their Form I-94 while in the US. Okay. In addition to your students' immigration documents, they'll also need to report their most updated addresses to ISPO by updating the information through the website shown here. Now, this is quite important as UC San Diego relies on this information to contact parents and families in the event of any travel or health emergencies. This can be a family member or friend that's inside or outside of the US. So please do encourage your students to update their current address in the US, their permanent address, so where they might reside in your home countries, and also emergency contact information. They can report and update this information on Triton Link. All right, so while your students' immigration documents are certainly important and should be updated as needed, it's important for parents and families to understand their students' immigration status during, after after and before, during, and after their program of study. Now, all of your students currently hold what is called an initial CVIS record. That means that they have not quite started their program of study and have begun their program of study in the fall quarter. However, once the student does arrive to the US and begins their program of study, then ISPO will activate your student's CVIS record. This then tells the US government that your student has arrived to the US and is now maintaining F1 and J1 status by enrolling full-time. Now, during their program, students should follow all the rules and reporting requirements, which we'll go over briefly in the next slide. A student's status should continue to remain active through their last date of enrollment in their program of study. Once their program completes, they will automatically enter their grace period. Now, during this grace period, students can apply for employment authorization after graduation, perhaps begin a higher degree program or graduate school with UC San Diego, or perhaps a different institution. They can also apply to change their visa status or simply make plans to depart the US. Our F1 students have a 60-day grace period, while our J1 students have a 30-day grace period. Now, understanding this timeline is important, as many of your students might have shorter or longer programs, right? And it will depend. So a student's status and their grace period may vary depending on their program of study. Let's go ahead and let's move on to the next slide, and let's go over the rules they'll need to follow during their program of study to maintain active F1 or J1 status. So your student will hear this term quite often: maintaining status, holding a valid I-20, valid DS 2019, an active CVIS record. This all is the same terminology to mean that your student is following these rules and maintaining their status in the US. So there are 6 main ones here. There are many more that we do provide on our website, but these are the 6 main ones for them to remember and for you to check in with them about from time to time, hopefully. Number 1, check their visa documents to ensure accuracy every time they seek entry to the US. So something I like to tell all of our students are, once you enter the US, sit down, make sure all of your documents are in order, everything is valid. All the documents we went over today: passport, visa, I-94, address, I-20, DS 2019, make sure everything is nice and up to date and valid. If there are any issues with your immigration documents or you have questions, always come and talk to ISPO and we can clarify any questions for you. Number 2, enroll full-time each. We'll go one slide back here, Dan. There we are. All right. So rule number 2 is enroll full-time each academic term. Full-time enrollment is considered to be 12 units, and it will be required for our academic terms. So that is fall, winter, and spring terms. The summer term is considered a vacation, and enrollment is not required. So students can choose to enroll if they'd like, but they also do not have to. Now, if your student at any time during the fall, winter, or spring term needs to drop below 12 units for any academic or medical reasons, they are encouraged to speak with ISPO about these exceptions that we might have to the full-time enrollment requirement for international students. Okay. Rule number 3. Please have your student report any updates to their I-20 or DS 2019 info to ISPO within 10 days. Again, they can do so within ISPO's iPortal. If they're not sure how to, they can always come talk to us and we can provide those instructions. Number 4, report address changes. Many of your students may live on campus, but as they progress in their programs and perhaps live off campus, make some friends and find roommates to find an off-campus housing arrangement with, then they'll need to update their off-campus housing address in Triton Link within 10 days of that change. And again, please do make sure they have an emergency contact on file for health or travel emergencies. Number 5, accept only authorized employment. Students may be eligible to work on or off campus here at UC San Diego, but it's very important that they understand the proper work authorization that they need before they start working. They can find out more employment authorization and eligibility information on ISPO's website. But it's really important. Many students already have a social security number from perhaps their previous institutions where they were authorized for employment then. But even though they have a social security number, they can't just use it to work or accept employment. It must always be paired with proper work authorization. So please do remind them of that and send them to our website for more information. And finally, number 6, your student must maintain adequate health insurance while in the US. Enrollment in UC San Diego's Student Health Insurance Plan, also known as SHIP, should fulfill this requirement. I know that was quite a bit of information, so please do submit any questions you might have in the Q&A tool, and we'll see how we can get those answered today. All right, so now let's briefly review travel for your students. As many of your students prepare to travel or will eventually travel to go home and visit family and friends, they can view ISPO's website. Very easy to remember, itravel.ucsd.edu. On this website, they can learn more about what documents they'll need in order to re-enter the US. They can also learn more about domestic travel and also travel to our neighboring countries, Mexico or Canada, during their time here. A lot of students always ask, what document do I need to leave? But those are not the kinds of questions we usually advise on. It's more about what questions you need to come back. So it's important for students to be aware of this information before they leave the US so they're prepared to arrive and continue their programs of study. Now, prior to travel, in addition to having all of their documents in order, it's also important for your student to know how to contact ISPO in the event they encounter any issues at the US port of entry. This International Student Emergency Card shown here on the screen is available for download on ISPO's website. The website is right there, icontact.ucsd.edu. They can also stop by our office once they're on campus and they can pick up a printed copy that conveniently fits right into their wallet, so they always have it with them. And ISPO is available during and after business hours for any emergency travel situations. So whether it is during our normal business hours or midnight, if your student is traveling and has a travel emergency, we have a phone number on file on this lovely little document here, or they can go to our iContact website and it's also online so that they can contact ISPO in that moment in time. I truly hope that this webinar was beneficial for you families and parents out there. Now, before we move on to the Q&A portion of this webinar, here are some links to many resources we have on our website. You and your student have various ways to connect with our office. We are available in person at our front desk, also available virtually by advising. We also have our phones and emergency travel lines if ever your student has those situations that arise, and also by email. ISPO looks forward to meeting and welcoming your student to UC San Diego this fall term. Thank you all for your time. I'm going to go ahead and send it back to Dan now.
Thanks so much, Pauline. All right, time for our question and answer portion of tonight's session. So Pauline's not going to go very far away because we have lots of questions. Thank you so much. Again, if you would like to have a question answered, please enter it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. First question, Pauline, is going to touch on what you may just covered, which is Social Security numbers. So a little bit of a two-parter from a parent. Do international first-year students receive a Social Security number? And a question that was related is, can a student apply for a social security number without employment and just as a student?
That is a good question. So our F1 international students will qualify to work and accept on-campus employment upon their program start date. So as soon as they arrive, they should be eligible to accept on-campus employment. In order to apply for a social security number, you do need to have employment authorized. I know many times when you are renting a home, perhaps renting an apartment or applying for something, they might ask for your social security number. You may not apply for one, unfortunately. F1 students are not eligible unless they have employment.
Great. Thanks, Pauline.
Mhm.
Okay, next question is about the I-20.
Sure.
I-20 is showing that the student preferred name is the same as the legal name. Should it be corrected, or does it not matter? Student has the legal name and preferred name on school's record.
Great question. So on the Form I-20, there are a couple of sections at the very top, biographical information for names. There is a legal name, a preferred name, and also a passport name. I don't know why they have so many fields there, but we might just need to reorder the way that your students' information is shown, but we should always have their legal name shown on their Form I-20 to ensure there's consistency during travel and any other application for benefits. Please do send your student to ISPO so we can take a look at their documents to make sure they're all in alignment.
Great, thanks. All right. Can a visa be renewed in any country other than the U.S. or only original country or country of origin?
That's a great question. So my answer is a little different because of the last 2 years. It's always recommended that you try to renew your visa in your home country. However, if you are not able to, then you certainly can apply for a visa in a different country. You will be known as a third country national during that application process. I would advise heavily that due to the state of the pandemic around the world, you contact the country first and ask that specific embassy or consulate if they are accepting applications for visa renewals from third country nationals. Due to consular services at different locations varying, they may or may not be able to accommodate third country nationals. So please do call them first before traveling to that country.
Awesome. Knocking these down. Okay, staying with an I-20 question is from a parent. Can you sign an I-20 for 2 years ahead in order to get a 2-year F1 visa next time?
I'm not sure I quite understand this question.
Yeah.
But I will say visa validity. So when your student goes to the US Embassy or consulate and applies for a visa, that visa is approved, hopefully, and it's approved for a specific amount of time. That is not at our discretion. It is usually at the consular's discretion. Even if your student has a very long program, they may only be approved for a 1-year visa. Even if your student has a shorter program, they may be approved for a 5-year visa. So it's quite difficult to be able to anticipate or make changes on the Form I-20 or DS-319, which might result in a longer visa validity. But please do send your student directly to our office and we can try to see if we can answer that question a bit better for them.
Great. Thanks, Pauline. Okay, here's a question about how ISPO assists students. The question is, how does ISPO help a student, I think, either apply or get an H4 to F1 conversion?
Okay, so this is quite specific. This is known as a change of non-immigrant status from H4 to F1. There are various ways to do this, and we will work with your student directly because their status and other benefits that might be ongoing at the same time may impact their application. So please do send your student to our office. I actually work with this group of students directly. to convert from H4 to F1 or any other non-immigrant status to F1. And I'm happy to provide more information on a one-on-one session.
Great. Thanks, Pauline. Okay, this is, I think, a simple one. Should an international student apply for a real ID?
So they can go to the DMV, and there are qualifications for a real ID. They certainly should if they are eligible.
Cool. Okay, so we have questions centered around students traveling.
Okay.
So the first one is, my student will be coming back home for the holidays. Will she re-enter the U.S. with the same documents she used for entering the first time?
Right, good question. So the student should. As we went over earlier, if a student arrives to the US, we activate that Form I-20. And as long as they're following all of the rules and requirements during their program of study, that CVIS record or that I-20 will remain active. So they should be able to use the same document that they leave to come back. Now, I will say students should visit our itravel.ucsd.edu website, and there is a list of documents they should carry with them. One of them is their I-20 with a valid travel signature. So that needs to be valid at all times at the time of re-entry. If they don't have one, they might need to ask us for a renewal, but it takes about 3 to 5 business days for us to process one, so we should be able to get that to the student before their date of re-entry.
All right, and the second one about traveling is, my student will be taking an international trip for a weekend during the program, not during a break, because of a family commitment. Is it different because it's not an official break? Is there an additional process? Will she have to leave and come back using her student visa, or can she use a tourist visa for those trips? Meaning, will she have to update her location on her F1?
All right.
That's a juicy one.
It's a juicy one. So weekends are a special time for students to travel, and luckily we have Mexico and Canada, which are very close by for them to do so. Many of our students choose to do that. During weekends, their F1 status is still valid, and they can use that Form I-20, F1 Form I-20, to exit and re-enter the US. So they shouldn't need to exit and come back on a tourist visa or anything like that. As long as they're still enrolled in their program of study, they should be able to use their Form I-20 to come back or travel in and out in F1 status during vacation breaks and weekends.
Great. Okay, so this is, again, with vacation, the question was just if an international student wants to travel to another country, does ISPO help with a tourist visa?
Okay. We don't handle this specific service. However, we do have some resources on our website for travel if they are traveling internationally and need insurance while abroad.
Okay. This question, how does a student access the DS 2019 form?
Sure. So your students can access their immigration documents by logging into ISPO's document request system, the iPortal. That's iportal.ucsd.edu. And they'll need to sign in through with single sign-on, but once they're there, they can either request a DS 2019 from us with a specific update, or they can always reference their DS 2019, which we'll upload for them once we make any applicable changes they've requested. And they can always have it in iPortal for them to download at any time.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Okay, so this is coming from a student. It appears that for home country and national service purposes, how can they certify that they are attending UC San Diego?
I will suggest, perhaps I'm sure what the purpose of the document is, that you come and talk to ISPO just to make sure that we're addressing whatever information you need verified. However, the best way for you to obtain enrollment verification would be through the registrar's office. A student can log into Triton Link And there are some options there regarding their documents, verification documents. And one of them should be the enrollment verification document to show they're a student here at UC San Diego.
Yes, that was my recommendation for any specific documentation about certification of enrollment. The registrar's office on campus, and that goes for a multitude of things. It could be for specific documentation for back home, or even for car insurance purposes, or any purpose that requires proof of enrollment. Um, the registrar's office will be there to help. But again, as Pauline said, please check in with ISPO first so they can ensure that they are setting you on the correct path. Um, all right, we have another question, and it starts from the parent that if we, as a family, get L1 and L2 visas, do we need to make changes to the student's visa status from F1 to L2? Also, does that make any difference to a green card application as a family?
All right, this is another juicy one. This can get quite complex only because your student does not need to change status to F1. They are eligible to begin their program on L2 status. But it depends on where you are in your program of study and if you want to avail certain benefits that the F1 visa provides. I do encourage you to please contact our office. Let's make an appointment and let's touch base one-on-one to see what's best for you and your student in the long run.
Yeah, great. Okay, and then we just have again a few questions about what a real ID is or how to get proof of the UCSD address for the real ID or driver's license. So first, I can answer the real ID is California's new state issued ID and or driver's license. The real ID requires extra verification through the state um, as part of a federal secure program that makes it easier to travel for folks within the United States that have a real ID. That program was to go into effect requiring all residents of California to have a real ID to travel within the United States way back in 2020, but that was pushed back due to the pandemic. And so folks can make appointments with the DMV. The DMV has a list of requirements, what is needed to require to get a real ID, the types of documentation that are required as well. So that real ID is a process through the state of California. As for proof of UCSD address, again, that would be requiring official documentation or certification. So I would recommend starting out with the registrar's office or even the resident hall that your student is staying with if they can get proof from the Res Life office with their specific residence hall. It's a good place to start. If your student finds themselves lost, as Pauline has mentioned about multiple situations tonight, it does not hurt to start and contact ISPO and get their recommendation and support in procuring a real ID or certification of address. Pauline, anything to add to those questions?
Nope, that was that. Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. And then also, a 17-year-old student can apply for a driver's license. However, they do have to pass a class, obtain driving hours, and then pass an in-car driving exam as well, which all can be set up and taken through the California Department of Motor Vehicles. All right, we are coming towards the end, so we'll go with just one more question before we wrap up tonight's session. Again, if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to email parents@ucsc.edu and we will follow up with you and either answer your question or loop you in with folks on campus who will be able to support you. So the last one is following a previous question. I understand that I believe students can use their student documents and visas to leave and re-enter the U.S. during a trip, but do they have to? Going through international immigration on a connected flight to stop to update the F1 location is much more complicated than it would be if they were taking a trip using their tourist visa/status.
Okay, so this is a travel question. Yes, the easy answer is yes, they do need to go through that process and pass through customs each time they travel internationally to seek re-entry to the US in F1 status. The reason we don't advise for your student to come back to the US on a tourist visa is because students who enter on a tourist visa are not eligible to study in the US. The B2, B1 visa does not permit study. So if your student chooses not to enter the US in F1 status and thus has a Form I-94 that shows they're here in B1, B2 status, it is a violation of that B1, B2 visa to study. So while it may add a few more layers during international travel to pass through the port of entry and go through customs that way, it is common and expected in order for your student to resume their program here in the US.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pauline. Thank you all for those questions. We have greatly appreciated your participation in tonight's session. And again, if we did not get to your question, please email parents@ucsd.edu and we will be more than happy to follow up. As we close tonight's presentation, I do want to let you all know that tonight's session is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. It will also be emailed out along with a PDF version of tonight's slide deck to all folks that registered for tonight's session. But when this recording is posted to YouTube, if you would like to watch it back with translated subtitles or share with a family member who would prefer translated subtitles, you can utilize the YouTube translation settings by selecting the settings on the video, selecting subtitles, the auto-translate feature, and selecting the preferred language that anyone may want to rewatch this session with translated subtitles. We are only getting started with International Parent-Family Orientation. This year is our first hybrid format where we have virtual sessions mixed with our in-person session on Sunday, September 18th. So our next virtual session will be back here in 2 days at the same time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, on Thursday, September 15th, discussing safeguarding your students' records. So it's really important. There's lots of information that is going back and forth. We just discussed so much when it comes to visa statuses, important documents, important information, important forms for your student to complete to ensure that they are compliant with what they need to be compliant for their visa status. But we'll talk about how we can keep students safe, how your student can take protective measures around finances, important information concerning school records, housing information, and all of that with a great panel of folks on Thursday evening. And then Sunday, we will have our International Parent and Family Orientation slate of scheduling for our in-person event that will kick off right at 8:30 a.m. for those that are registered. Again, I want to thank you all for participating and supporting your student with tonight's session. Thank you so much, Pauline, for the great presentation, information, and insight to all that goes into the different visa statuses for students here at UC San Diego. Thank you to our staff on the back end for helping answer questions. Please stay in touch with us. Again, you can email us at parents@ucsd.edu. Visit our website at parents.ucsd.edu or stay connected with us on social media. Thank you so much. Again, I hope to see some of you on Thursday for our next virtual session, and I can't wait to meet some of you folks this Sunday for our in-person session. Thank you so much. Stay well and have a great rest of your evening, morning, or day wherever you may be joining us from.